Good evening, good evening. On behalf, of the Rescuing Our Communities podcast. This is Clayton here, um, with our nightly episode, continuing into injustice and continuing into, professional misconduct, continuing into racism and discrimination within domestic violence and criminal rights. Tonight, we're going to talk about the purpose of a domestic violence advocate, what their responsibilities are, how they're paid, and essentially what you can do if your rights are ever violated by a domestic violence agency that is supposed to protect you as the trial ordered victim. Now, as many of you who watch me know, my purpose behind this is to help those who may be going through something like myself. I was an advocate who was horribly slandered and defamed by members of the Staten Island Richmond County District Attorney's Office when they decided to frame me in order to grant my offender the rights to be a domestic violence victim. Now, what I mean by the fact they framed me is quite simple. I won a trial order of protection against my ex-girlfriend for harassment and burglary in December 1st of 2022. By federal standards, that made me the victim of the domestic dispute between myself and my ex. Now, with regard to federal rights and federal protections, once a trial was had, I was the trial ordered victim of this restraining order. The only way law enforcement could deny me the rights and the protection of that order is if I had been named in the system somewhere else, or in their system, to be an offender or to be a defendant in an active domestic violence case. So what did Staten Island do? Staten Island decided to frame me. Staten Island decided to create a complaint so I would become a criminal defendant, and by doing so, this would bar me from the federally protected resources of a domestic violence victim, which I 100% was. There was really nothing I could do about it, ladies and gentlemen, because again, the truth of the matter is that racism is quite real within this country. And many times in your own life, you'll try to do things that will be horribly, horribly shut down by people who don't feel that you have a legal right to the protections or services afforded to you as the victim of anything. Unfortunately, this happened to me when the Staten Island Richmond County District Attorney's Office decided that I was unworthy of any rights as the victim and decided to frame me for allegations of domestic violence so they could bar me from legitimate services as the trial ordered victim of a domestic violence dispute. I really didn't know what to do when this happened to me, people. I'm going to be honest with you. I was angry. I was incredibly hurt because it happened to me in the community where I grew up with people who claimed to, love me, support me, care about me. Like I said, I had just lost my mother, so a lot of these people use this as an excuse, I want to say, to get close to me, so they could kind of hurt me or take advantage of me, which was actually done. Unfortunately, during that time, I happened to meet a woman who I thought was a good person, but she turned out to be a piece of shit. People, it happens. There's really nothing you can do about that when it turns out that people that you may know, forgive me, people, I'm just setting up my distribution. It's not your fault when it turns out in a domestic violence relationship that the person you thought was a good person may turn out to be a piece of shit. People, that's not your fault. You have no way of knowing that you have no way of knowing that someone you date today could turn out to be the worst thing that ever happened to you a week from now. The only thing that truly exposes people, exposes their misconduct, exposes their ill will, exposes their need to, I want to say, get revenge on you, a need to hurt you, a dislike for you, is time. Time is the greatest exposer of people's ways, people. You don't need to figure out anything. You don't have to set them up. All you have to do is wait long enough. And that ex-girlfriend, that ex-boyfriend, that guy who likes you, that won't stop calling, that girl that can't seem to get that you don't want anything to do with her, eventually she's going to expose herself to either be crazy or somebody that you should look at and pay more of attention. Most of the time, when people pursue you and you don't like them, people, they turn out to be crazy. You should definitely adhere to the signs. I was no different, but I was going through grief, unfortunately. So going through grief, it brings you to a place when you're going through grief from losing people, where you actually don't. I want to say you kind of block out things around you, which is a huge mistake, people. Because if you keep blocking out things around you, what's actually going to happen is you're going to miss the most important things right in front of you. And for me, I happen to just miss that a psychopath was in front of me, and it's taken 4 years out of my life. Now, I could be angry and I could be bitter. I could hate the world. I could blame everything on racism and oppression, which some people try to say I'm doing because they lack the capacity to simply understand what I'm saying by listening. Simply because I speak about the racism in Staten Island and white people, believe me, I am not racist at all, people. I have many, many white friends. One of my best friends is like a 70-year-old retired engineer, super cornball, but he's a good guy. So I recognize good people, I recognize good character, and I keep those around me. White, black, Chinese, Hispanic, whatever you are. If you're a good person and me and you have been friends, it's probably because I know you're a good person and I'm willing to go to bat for you, help you, whatever that might be. Maybe that was one of, I want to say, the attributes of my late mother. She would help anyone. It's probably something that is definitely transferred over to me. But everybody doesn't want to help you, people. Many times in your life, you may experience things where people who you thought were going to help you and support you will not do that. One situation that could possibly happen to is if you're ever placed in a situation, excuse me, where you're a victim in a domestic violence dispute. Now, most of the time, women who do this, they are instantly supported by the community, by the cops, by everybody, because a woman's right to make allegations of domestic violence, and I want to say this right, is protected by the history of domestic abuse between men and women. It's really hard to try to take that right from women because of so much physical abuse that they've suffered over the years, being treated as the lesser of the human race, if I want to say, which is true, because men have had a propensity for decades, for eons, for hundreds of thousands of years, because women are the weaker sex, to treat them like they are less than us, even though they are quite literally our equals. They're just feminine, they just have weaker muscle structures. Um, because of this, eventually, women bonded together. A lot of things happened. The women's suffrage movement began. Women's rights began. And now women are pretty much treated just as equally as men. Women are treated better than, I want to say, women are treated better than black people. Of course, everybody's treated better than black people. It's just what it is. Um, and, some people may disagree with me because it looks like, the minorities and blacks have so many rights, but we really don't. They just use black people to give rights to the LGBT community and everyone else, but black people don't get these rights. And I know this for a fact because I am a black man, and I can tell you 100% that the protections afforded to domestic violence victims are not afforded to black men, not without a lot of work and putting people on blast. So, what did I have to do? Like I said, on December 1st of 2022, I won an order of protection against a woman who was harassing the hell out of me. People, I didn't know what to do. I really did not know what to do. I tried to work with domestic violence agencies. As many of you can recount from my former broadcast, I was horribly lied to. I was lied to by members of the Richmond County DA's office who told me that my federally protected order of protection was unenforceable in the borough of Staten Island, New York. Now, the only way that would be possible is if Staten Island was part of an entirely different country, which it is not. But because these people felt I was ignorant and that I would not be able to I want to say, gain the statutory and the administrative knowledge to hold them accountable for lying, that's exactly what they're doing. And when in a small borough like in Staten Island's not small, let me correct myself. In a small place like Staten Island where everyone knows each other, it's really easy to corrupt the system because the advocates and the DA, everyone knows each other. They're all part of their own little network. So what happened to me is that a community of people teamed up against me to bar me from domestic violence resources in order to uplift its chosen golden girl. Now we find ourselves in the Eastern District of New York facing federal civil rights lawsuits because the Richmond County DA's office fucked up when they falsely arrested me horribly. One, they arrested me for allegations that occurred in the state of New Jersey. Even if those allegations were true, they happened in the state of New Jersey. So New Jersey would have had territorial jurisdiction over those crimes, meaning that New York could not arrest and prosecute me for anything that happened in the state of New Jersey. And this is a fact. But when you're dealing with a racist and oppressive system, they don't really care about legality. They only care about enforcing their racist doctrine. And this is what the Staten Island District Attorney, Mike McMahon, did. On the orders of Mike McMahon, a detective from the 120 precinct, Joseph Quirk, decided to falsify a criminal complaint against me. He did this because once I would be arrested for this criminal complaint for a domestic violence dispute, it would thereby give me an active domestic violence complaint naming me the defendant. And this was the only thing that could bar me from the federal and state mandated resources awarded to final victims of domestic violence. And by final, I mean a trial has happened, you have been granted the order, your offender's order has been dismissed, and your offender is named as the defendant in the domestic violence restraining order that protects you. That's what a final order is. That happens after a trial. So by state and federal law, if you are the party who acquires that, the agencies must help you. It doesn't matter if your offender has a TPO. They have to help the person with the superior order. It is federal law. The Staten Island didn't want to do that to me, people, because again, I was a black man, and in the borough of Staten Island, black men don't have any civil rights, not as long as this piece of shit Mike McMahon is the district attorney. See, people, he doesn't believe black men have rights. He believes that we're tools to use in order to manipulate the black community into voting for him, because that's all he really needs us black people for. He needs us for our votes. Our votes matter. Our rights don't matter, but our votes do. And this is why I say that any African American, any minority advocate who stands next to this racist white man is exactly that. You're biased, you're completely uneducated, you're uninformed, and you're ignorant of the issues of your community. Because just because Clayton Howard speaks out so sternly against him, I'm not the only person who's suing the Staten Island District Attorney's Office right now for civil rights violations. They're actually facing 6 or 7 lawsuits right now. So there has to be some type of history of previous civil rights violations, even before me, with the Richmond County District Attorney's Office getting away with this. Because, see, people, we have to look at something really simple. There's a couple of lawsuits in right now, and these were just the people like myself who refused to take no for an answer and decided to sue. But, ladies and gentlemen, let's think about it. How many people probably didn't have the resources to sue, or the will, or the intelligence? How many cases have just gone by the wayside because the people were so happy to get away they just went on with their lives? This is what the Staten Island District Attorney's Office is. This is their main strategy when they falsify information and falsely arrest people. They hope that the person is so unintuned and so unable to obtain the resources that you're just going to go on with your life. And nobody's going to make a stink about the fact that they falsify documents, falsely arrest people, maliciously prosecute people, and defame and slander innocent victims in favor of puppet victims they actually create. A puppet victim was created to violate my civil rights, and her name was Francina Evans. She happened to be, I want to say, the little girl toy of Mike McMahon. He has to be sexually attracted to this woman because I can't understand why he would have basically thrown out the integrity of his office to frame me for a domestic violence dispute. Ladies and gentlemen, I was completely framed by the Staten Island District Attorney's Office. And until Courtney Chase, until Mackenzie Upshaw, until Darren Albanese, until Alva Prenga, until Gabrielle Giovanazio, until Darren Albanese, I may have said his name, and until Michael McMahon, the district attorney himself, can disprove the audio recordings, the text messages, the emails that I'm showing people, again, I am a justified victim of a civil rights violation by the Staten Island District Attorney's Office framing me for civil rights for alleged domestic violence allegations. I didn't know what to do, audience. I tried everything. I called the audience respectfully. Many of you heard my phone call speaking to Mackenzie Upshaw, talking to Courtney Chase, trying to be a professional, trying to be a respectful adult, providing them documents, providing them paperwork. As you saw from the evidence that I provided, nothing was happening on Staten Island. They needed to frame me. It did not matter that they knew I was the victim. They just needed to frame me. They needed the charge to stick. So they totally ignored my federally protected order and they attacked my civil rights. So, like I've said, I sued them in the Eastern District of New York for several $1 million. And now I advocate against injustice and corruption and bias in law enforcement. Because the truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, although I may have seemed like an angry black man, it does happen. Law enforcement does, racism, excuse me, does exist in law enforcement in New York. It most certainly exists in Staten Island, New York. And its top law official in Staten Island, New York is 100% a racist, lying piece of shit. So, people, I want to teach people how I learned how to fight these people back because calling the office did nothing. Writing letters to the office did nothing. Providing proof to the audience that I was the federally mandated victim of a domestic violence restraining order, even providing the transcript to that order, did nothing, people. They did not care. So, people, again, like I've said several times so far, I had to sue them. And what I also had to do was learn how to attack their federal and state funding. Because, yes, people, programs that claim to be domestic violence programs or agencies, they're state and federally funded, meaning that they get grants from the state to help victims of domestic violence, especially final victims who win restraining orders. And when these agencies refuse to do their job and help these agencies or falsify documentation or discriminate against victims, they place their own funding in jeopardy. So, people, I have learned as a man who has been through much when you can't be reasonable with people, when you can't get people to listen to you, by trying to be logical and showing them proof and showing them evidence. There's something you can do. You attack their fucking money. Because when you attack people's money, the one thing they're going to do is they're going to do it in a bow face and they're going to listen to you. So I have learned how to attack the federal and state funding of the Staten Island Richmond District Attorney's Office, and I want to show my audience how to do it because it's so it's so important that you learn how to attack the administrative functions of a corrupt agency. That as a victim, if you learn how to do this, you'll immediately get answers. If you go after the people who are funding the agency, who are depriving you of services, that agency has a charter. That agency has some rules and regulations that it must abide by in order to maintain a supported status of federal or state funding. And if it violates that for any reason, let's say it's a program that works with single mothers. A single mother comes in, the counselor doesn't like this chick because of her attitude and decides to discriminate against her. That counselor is putting that entire agency's funding under jeopardy because you're discriminating against a single mother who the program is designed to be funding. The same works in domestic violence, people. I was a victim with a trial ordered final or restraining order, which means a judge in a feder in a I want to say this right because it's pertaining to 18 United States Code 2265, which is the full faith and credit clause. As long as an order of protection comes from a jurisdiction, a court that abides by 18 United States Code 2265, which is the full faith and credit clause, every state, every prosecutor, every cop, every advocate, anybody who is in a law enforcement position must abide by the terms of this restraining order. They can't deny it. They can't say, no, we don't want to enforce it because it's from California. No, if it comes from a state that backs the full faith and credit clause, which is 18 United States Code 2265, then they have to enforce the order. A prosecutor can't decide, you know what, it's from Connecticut, I don't want to enforce it. They don't have that option. But Staten Island took that option with me. So what I did was I started attacking their federal funding. I wrote the Office for Violence Against Women Act of the United States. There's several offices I'll provide in the different video. But what I'm going to walk you through now is the purpose of a domestic violence advocate, their responsibilities, how they're paid, and what you can do to attack an agency's funding if they have violated your rights to the extent where they have denied you the very services that they're lying to the government, telling the government they are providing victims. Because people, this is about justice. And people like the people who violated my rights, from the Staten Island District Attorney's Office, Mackenzie Upshaw, Courtney Chase, um, Lisa Thompson, these people who are paid through the resources of a federal domestic violence grant, they don't deserve to be paid if they're lying to innocent victims and falsifying narratives and withholding evidence that supports the innocence of the trial ordered victim. So without further ado, we're going to get into this podcast before I do too much talking. And this is how to fight back when your rights are violated by a domestic violence agency or program by Operation Rocket Clayton, Part 1. So let's go. The agenda for this podcast is: what is a domestic violence advocate? What is the responsibility of a domestic violence advocate? How are programs with advocates funded? What is the mandatory requirement of any program that receives federal or state funding? What happens when federally or state funded programs violate their duties to victims of domestic violence? And what can victims do if they believe a federally or state funded agency has violated their rights? The most important topics we are going to discuss today because people, this happens. These agencies violate the rights of victims every day, and I'm not one to stand for it, people. So what I choose to do is educate the other victims like myself who may be denied access to their children, who may be falsely arrested, who may be manipulated by being kicked out of offices for whatever lie your offender told. No, these people have a mandatory obligation to you if you have the superior order. And I'm going to show you how to hold them accountable today if they don't grant you that obligation or that right. Domestic violence advocate. A domestic violence advocate is a trained professional who provides support, resources, and guidance to victims of domestic violence. Advocates typically work in shelters, nonprofits, legal aid organizations, hospitals, or crisis centers, and their role is victim centered and confidential. What is the responsibility of a domestic violence advocate? Excellent question. The core responsibilities include crisis intervention and safety planning, emotional support and counseling referrals, assistance with protective restraining orders, helping victims navigate the legal and social services system, providing information about victims' rights, advocating for victims with law enforcement or in the court, and ensuring confidentiality and empowerment based support. Now, people, one of the most important things for my livecast today that I want to go over is advocating for victims with law enforcement or in the court. Now, as I told you, people, I was framed on Staten Island because Staten Island needed to list me as a criminal defendant so these advocates could not provide me with a voice to go to the district attorney and report the criminality of my ex. So what the Richmond County District Attorney's Office did again, people, was they framed me to make me a defendant in the system, and by making me the defendant of an active domestic violence dispute, it circumvented and it superseded my final restraining order, which had already named my offender as the victim. So what they did was they charged me right after this woman was convicted, so I would immediately be a victim, and the system would bar me before I had a chance to enter this order of protection into the system of New York, and they knew that my offender was lying, which is 100% of a conspiracy, audience. And this is why I'm suing Michael McMahon, the NYPD, and the Staten Island Richmond County DA's office because they conspired to deprive me of my civil rights. But let's continue. So, okay, so we said helping victims navigate the legal and social services system, providing information about victims' rights, advocating for victims with law enforcement or in the court, and ensuring confidentiality and empowerment based support. And people, if you remember my previous podcast, Mackenzie Upshaw, what did she say in that video, Mackenzie Upshaw? What did Mackenzie Upshaw say? Just for a quick break, what did Mackenzie Upshaw of the Richmond County District Attorney's Office say in the recording I played for her before I talked to Courtney Chase? I should not be a criminal defendant, and she was going to advocate to the district attorney because she knew my ex was falsifying reports on me, and I should not be a criminal defendant. So, audience, that was the job of Mackenzie Upshaw. Exactly what I just read. As the advocate, she was supposed to advocate to law enforcement and say, wait a minute, I heard from this guy 6 months ago. He sent me 3 or 4 orders of protection against this woman. She's been indicted. She's stalking him. He didn't report the child stolen, the child abuse. The mother reported after he told the mother because the woman contacted him. All this, she was supposed to tell the district attorney. But the conspiracy to frame me was so large on Staten Island, she withheld this information. The district attorney's office knew it already. But she wasn't going to go lobby for me because people, she knew Mike McMahon had a hard on for me and was already framing me for false charges. So why would Mackenzie Upshaw, as a domestic violence advocate, which you just saw in my last slide, she's mandated to lobby to law enforcement if something happens to the victim. This is why she wouldn't do it. This is why Courtney Chase would lie and not provide me any services. Because they knew that if they brought forward the valid information I had, that Francina Evans would be removed as the victim. And they didn't want that because they did not want to embarrass the law enforcement apparatus of Staten Island, which is incredibly racist and incredibly corrupt. Just because you see a black woman does not mean that the law enforcement apparatus isn't racist. Just like slavery, white men used to rape black women all the time, have nigger children, half black children, and kill those half black children so their wife would know about it. People, this is a historical fact of the injustices and atrocities that, forgive me for saying, white men formerly did in raping and impregnating black women and sleeping with them and then going out later that night and lynching a bunch of black men. You can like black women and still hate black men and be a racist. Just like black men can be attracted to white women and not like white guys. People, racism is something that is so funny. And so the line between racism is so thin that it is completely ignorant to not realize that just because the opposite sex may be attractive, that that person still can't be racist. You can be fundamentally racist and be attracted to a white woman. You can be fundamentally racist and be attracted to a black woman. People, it happens all the time. I think the only time it really doesn't happen is with women, but I don't know because I'm not a woman. I just have known white men who hate black men but will sleep with black women, and I have known black guys who can't stand white guys but love sleeping with white girls. So people, I know for a fact this can happen. I'm sorry, let's get back to the slide. So, how are programs with advocates funded? Which is an excellent question, and one that you're going to need to know if you're going to attack any agency that violates your civil rights funding. Finding the money. Programs employing domestic violence advocates are typically funded through a combination of federal grants, example given through the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, people, which is what I've mentioned numerous times. The Violence Against Women Act controls the enforcement of law enforcement within the 52 states of the United States. Every state must abide by the conditions and regulations set within the Violence Against Women Act. And if they don't abide by it, they can lose their federal funding. Like what the Richmond County District Attorney's Office did when it decided to frame me to make Francina Evans a puppet victim. I attacked their funding now. State and local government funding. The New York State has domestic violence funding, which the Richmond County District Attorney's Office receives also. Private donations. I'm trying to find out their private donations now, if they get anything like that. Foundations and community fundraisings and the Victims of Crime Act. And that's important, people. The Crime Victims' Right Act also provides funding to domestic violence victims. So, again, if you are listed as the plaintiff and victim in a domestic violence dispute and a district attorney's office frames you to deny you those rights by falsifying a criminal complaint against you, that district attorney's office, that agency within that district attorney's office is 100% liable for the loss of their funding through framing you to remove the rights that you were entitled to as the trial ordered final proven victim of a domestic violence dispute. This is why it's important to attack the money because most victims don't know this or they don't know how to attack the money. The only way these people are going to listen to you and respect you is to go after their pockets or their careers because otherwise they're going to use the totality of the system to frame you and fuck up your whole life. Excuse my language, but it happened to me, people. It really did. Mandatory funding requirements, what the programs must do in order to obtain and sustain their funding. What is the mandatory requirement of any program that receives federal or state funding? Programs that apply and receive state or federal funding have mandatory requirements they must meet and maintain in order to obtain or sustain their funding status. When a program violates these mandatory requirements, a danger of the loss of that funding is created. Denying a trial ordered victim of a restraining order enforceable under the VAWA is a mandatory investigation into the loss of framing. So, people, as the victim of a domestic violence restraining order protected by the Violence Against Women Act of 1994, which I believe is its most recent update, if you can prove that a program that receives funding under the Violence Against Women Act, if you can prove that a program that receives funding under this act has discriminated against you, violated your civil rights, framed you, or anything negative it is not supposed to do as the agency that is responsible for providing you these resources pursuant to their federal funding, you can file a complaint to have that agency or program investigated for the loss of their funding. And if you can substantially prove that this agency framed you to deny you the services of a domestic violence restraining order, then this agency is in danger immediately for losing its funding. And guess what I did, people? I filed an investigation against the Richmond County DA's office because I can prove they did this to me. They don't want to grant me my trial ordered rights, people, no problem. The federal government will or take their funding from them, and that's how I'm giving it up. Programs receiving federal and state funding must comply with federal and state laws, including non-discrimination, confidentiality, and victim-centered practices. People, remember again, I was the victim. I was discriminated against, and I was framed so my offender would become the victim, and I would be listed in the system as a domestic violence offender, thereby barring me from the use of my active restraining order because they put a new criminal complaint against me to circumvent the active restraining order against my ex. This is the corruption of the Staten Island District Attorney's Office. This is the corruption of Michael McMahon, advocates like Courtney Chase and Mackenzie Upshaw. This is what they do. And people, I would be less of a man if I did not sit back and empower and educate my audience to know that the local district attorney's office of Staten Island is willing to set up black men for misdemeanor domestic violence offenses. If they're willing to set me up for a misdemeanor domestic violence offense, audience, you can bet your ass that they're setting up other people. They're setting up people on murder charges. They're setting up people on drug charges. They're setting people up by creating narratives that are hard to beat if you lack the competency and legal, I want to say, representation to properly combat what they're doing. So what I do again, people, is I educate and empower because I want to expose the corruption within scumbag district attorney's office like the Richmond County District Attorney. He is corrupt, he is racist, and it is my mission until either I die or something happens to me to constantly advocate against this man because he needs to be removed from power. He is horribly corrupt. He is racist. It is time that somebody speak up against this racism and corruption because nothing ever will happen. You come from a community of sellouts, people. They don't care. As long as they get free chicken and a spot next to the DA in the picture, they're willing to let him violate the rights of dozens of minorities. Guess what, audience? I'm not. So, comply with federal and state laws, including non discrimination, confidentiality, victim centered practices. Provide services without charging victims. Avoid conflict of interest or re traumatization. Now, people, that's an interesting one. They have to avoid conflict of interest and they have to avoid anything they may re traumatize the victim. Now, people, I would say that working with the defendant of an active restraining order is a conflict of interest, especially if there's an active restraining order in the domestic violence registry that is definitively named the offender that the district attorney's office has decided to empower and work with as a defendant in a domestic violence restraining order. See, domestic violence law under the Violence Against Women Act mandates that the district attorney's office must investigate something like that if it happens where someone is convicted of a restraining order and then the offender goes and files charges on them. That's called a retaliatory report. And the closer it is to that determination of the restraining order, the more likely it's a retaliatory report. So the 120 precinct in Richmond County DA's office had a federal mandated, uh, um, they had a federal mandate to investigate the complaint that my ex filed 4 days after she was convicted in the state of New Jersey. But they didn't do that because they knew looking into that trial would expose their alleged victim to be a pathological liar. So what they did was circumvent that by ignoring the fact that myself and my attorney was giving them this order of protection. They literally did this, people. Myself and the attorney have proof that they were ignoring the order of protection. They're in some trouble, people. So they can try to play this political game where they make the office look more credible than it is. But the truth of the matter is, Mike McMahon can take pictures with food trucks, crippled fucking Jews, one-armed Muslims. Doesn't matter, people. He's corrupt. He's a pathological liar, and I'm going to expose the corruption of that office not by simply bashing him verbally every day, people, but by showing you federal statute, federal case law, the requirements of domestic violence federally funded agencies, and the recordings and emails from the office. People, that's all I got to do. I have more than enough proof to substantiate that I'm not lying on the Richmond County District Attorney's Office, and they 100% framed me for criminal charges to deny me the trial ordered awarded protection as a federal protected victim of domestic violence. So let's finish because we're almost at the end of the slide, audience, and we're at 35 minutes. So uh, the conflict of interest came when they worked with my offender. And clearly, by arresting me, knowing that I was the trial ordered victim, they traumatized the hell out of me, people. I was the victim. Imagine being the victim of a domestic dispute and believing that your offender is going to leave you alone, only to have another state that had nothing to do with the domestic case arrest you because your ex girlfriend happens to know the racist white man who's in charge of law enforcement in the borough. Come on, people. Imagine how that felt to me as the victim who won this order of protection to be framed by my ex girlfriend because she happened to know the most powerful white man on Staten Island. People, that's insane. But that's what my life became to because I am subjected to the racism of the Richmond County DA's office, where a black man does not have rights. On Staten Island, a black man can only be an offender. He can't be a victim. And it's proof of what I'm saying by the fact Michael McMahon framed me before winning a federally protected order of protection. And until the Richmond County DA's office can do something to combat what I'm saying, because people, I've been saying it for a year. Nothing's happened to me. They can't arrest me because I'm telling the truth, audience. They totally framed me for the lies of Francina Evans, and now they're trying to use social media to cover that up so no one knows what happened. But people, that's why I'm here. Alive, healthy, strong, and quite credible. Here to show you statute, here to show you recordings, here to show you emails, here to show you documents to prove that the Richmond County DA's office is not a credible institution of law enforcement. They frame innocent minorities, they falsify information, and they conspire to lock innocent victims out of trial ordered awarded orders of protection to foster racism. And until the district attorney's office of Staten Island can prove that didn't happen, they are on charge for me. I publicly accuse them of racism and discrimination, and every podcast that I make is dedicated to exposing the racism and the corruption of Mike McMahon. He needs to be removed. He is completely incompetent, and he is a racist bastard. And until we wake up as a community overall to realize that this man is not our savior, he is our oppressor, we're going to have problems. So, people, Whoever doesn't believe in Clayton Howard, look at the evidence. Ask yourself how two advocates within this office, one of whom is the supervisor, is on tape lying to a federally protected victim of a domestic violence restraining order just to deny him the rights of someone who does not have the trial order, who is a friend of the district attorney's office. People, no, that's not justice. That's framing an innocent black man. And this black man ain't the one to go for that shit. So, offer trauma informed or culturally competent services. I was denied that by the Staten Island District Attorney's Office. Adhere to grant reporting and performance standards. Federal guidelines often prohibit discrimination based on race, religion, gender, immigration status, disability, or more. People, I was totally discriminated by this office, and I'm going to tell you why, because I was a black man with a criminal record that Mike McMahon did not like. So because I was a black guy that he didn't like, he totally discriminated on me, and the advocates in the DA's office barred me from all federal resources as the trial ordered victim of the restraining order. And until they can disprove that, people, I have the power of the truth back in me. Nobody can touch me. So we're going to slide number 11. What happens when federal or state funded programs violate their duties to victims of domestic violence? The penalties of racism, gender bias, or discrimination. If a program violates its duties, consequences may include the loss of funding, investigation by the funding agency, civil lawsuits, reputational damage, state or federal audits or compliance reviews. Serious violations can lead to termination of contracts or government agreements. So, people, as the trial ordered victim of a federally protected restraining order, I can tell you that the Richmond County DA's office did at least three of the five things here to me. Um, well, I've taken three of the five actions. I've attacked their funding. I'm trying to aim to get their funding taken. I've written several letters to the U.S. The Department of Justice to order an investigation into the funding agency, which is the agency that funded the Richmond County DA's office in Safe Horizon. And I filed a civil suit in the Eastern District of New York for civil rights violations pursuant to United States Federal 42, United States Code 1981, 1983, 1985, and 1986, and the Monell Doctrine, which allows me as a private citizen to hold the city of New York accountable for the actions of a corrupt district attorney who believes that he's going to use the 11th Amendment to get out of violating my civil rights. See, that's the beautiful part, about learning how to read, people. Mike McMahon violated my rights, believing that as a prosecutor, he had absolute immunity protected by the 11th Amendment. The 11th Amendment does grant absolute immunity to prosecutors, but it doesn't grant them immunity if it can be proven that they committed a crime or that they intentionally violated a federal or state law. That's when the shield, the protection of absolute immunity that cops and prosecutors have, cops actually have qualified immunity, which is a certain level of difference. But cops and prosecutors have immunity, which is granted by the 11th Amendment of the Constitution. And basically, this amendment grants them absolute immunity as long as they're performing the duties of their job. Like a prosecutor cannot be prosecuted for the actions they commit while they're in prosecuting mode. But if they're in an investigative mode, if they're in an administrative mode, meaning that they're working behind the scenes in the office, then their absolute immunity kind of gets dropped down to what the police have, which is a qualified immunity. Qualified immunity can be attacked if you find defects, in the investigation techniques, if you find misconduct, if you find fraud, if you find any criminality or unethical content, qualified immunity can be taken from a cop or a prosecutor. So, what the Richmond County District Attorney's Office did to me by falsifying this report and lying, they're not able to claim qualified immunity because there is most certainly a visible conspiracy and something happened with me. They have to justify why I was arrested for crimes reported by my offender that happened in another state, even though this cop falsified a complaint against me for allegations that happened a year ago. My offender claimed that I had harassed her and falsely reported her in the state of New Jersey. So Staten Island, New York had no justification to even investigate me. And the fact that there is a totally separate criminal complaint other than the allegations this woman files proves that I was framed. Let's keep going because I don't want to be on too long. We have 42 minutes. I got to get off soon. Okay. What can victims do if they believe a federal or state funded agency has violated their rights? One, victims can take several steps. File a complaint with the agency that awarded the funding, e.g., the Office of Violence Against Women Act or a criminal state justice agency that deals with the Violence Against Women Act will help you file a complaint against the New York City Family Justice Center, against the VCCO of New Jersey, which is the Victims of Crime Compensation Organization. Um, oh God, what else is it? You can contact the New Jersey Department of Discrimination, the New York Department of Discrimination, whatever agency deals with discrimination and domestic violence funding and maintenance. You can file a complaint and provide evidence. You have to have evidence. You can't simply go there and say, "Oh, I think I was discriminated against." They need proof, like I have. They need text messages. They need recordings. They need emails. They need proof that this agency may have done something that at least warrants the investigation. Now, whether or not you'll get the decision, that's totally different because, again, the city doesn't like to be sued. And a lot of these agencies do work together unless there is a huge violation that they cannot ignore. So be prepared for roadblocks. Be prepared for what's that? What's the word I'm looking for? Be prepared for delays, system delays. Be prepared for all of it because you're dealing with the city of New York and they aren't the most efficient. Contact a civil rights office, the Department of Justice, like I just told you. Report the misconduct to a state level domestic violence coalition. File agreements through the organization's internal complaint process, which I seriously doubt if you're dealing with the NYPD will work because the NYPD supports its own. Believe that. The DA's offices of New York support their own. So you're better going federal than relying on anything that has to do with New York State government. They are notoriously corrupt and they stick together. Many programs must post or provide information about complaint processes and clients as part of their funding requirements. So basically, that just states that you look at this agency to see if they've ever had any complaints or ever had any lawsuits against them, etc. All right, we're just about done. We got one more slide. Oh, good. As a victim, you have power. You can fight back. This is Clayton from Operation Rock, and that was pretty much our broadcast on what you can do as a victim, and your victim rights are violated by domestic violence agencies, state or federally funded. A couple of minutes before we get off, I am on a mission to expose corruption in a borough of Staten Island. Not because I live in Staten Island anymore, people. My mother was a very prominent figure on Staten Island. I kind of feel like I have an obligation or a loyalty to this place that it forbids me to kind of turn my back on it, especially if I know something's wrong. And I happen to know that the Staten Island District Attorney's Office is corrupt, racist, and gender biased. I know this because for the last 5 years I have been violated civilly numerous times by conspiracies to deprive me of my rights as a victim and as a defendant in a crime that I was framed in. Now one could say that maybe I just have problems with the law. People, I'll be honest with you, maybe when I was younger I did. But as a man, I don't have problems with the law anymore. My only problems come when I am unfortunately subjected to racist or biased law enforcement officials or agencies, like those of the Staten Island District Attorney's Office and several low level police agencies in New Jersey that don't feel black men have the right to claim victimhood even after a trial awards them that victimhood. If anyone thinks I'm a liar, people, again, you can simply watch the last 10 or so episodes of my podcast and you can clearly see, you'll clearly hear members of the Richmond County District Attorney's Office lied to me about federally protected orders. You'll hear how the faculty and staff denied me, how they played games and deferred me for over a year, denying me services because they listed me as a victim in the system, even though their own advocates knew I should have never been charged. People, I think that the experience that I've lived through the last 5 years dealing with the corruption of the Staten Island District Attorney's Office has 100% made me a credible advocate against civil rights violations and the unfortunate situations that happen when women use domestic violence to avoid criminality with law enforcement, which is something that happens all the time. People, women commit crimes, they are scared to get in trouble. They'll lie and accuse the man of beating them and coercively controlling them or controlling them through fear. And guess what? Law enforcement is usually so thirsty to get a prosecution if that guy has any darkness on him, any criminality, any aspects of a dark past. They're going to open an investigation and they're going to go with the narrative of that woman, even if they see definitive evidence that substantiates this woman might be lying. They're going to use that evidence, they're going to create a narrative, and they're going to prosecute the living shit out of you until you can break that narrative in order to prove that you're innocent. I'm not even going to say as a black man, people, because I've met a lot of white gentlemen in the last year that are good brothers. I want to say, people, as someone who is, as a party lacking resources in this country, you are in great danger of being framed by the lies of a woman. If you're a man, excuse me, even women, you are in great danger of being framed by someone who is intelligent enough to use law enforcement as a weapon against you. Law enforcement can be weaponized. People do not think that someone that cannot weaponize the police, prosecutors, and judges against you. People, it is so easy. You will be surprised how easy it is for someone to build an army of law enforcement officials to fuck your life up. It does not take a lot. It only takes your offender to have a smidget more credibility than you. And that defendant, even though they'll be exposed lying, will have you prosecuted everywhere they go to. And people, I know this because it's happened to me. It's literally happened to me being framed by a woman who has never been criminally charged with a crime. Just because she hasn't doesn't have past criminality, people, all the current criminality to the district attorneys and to the cops don't seem to matter because the person she's doing all this criminality to is a black guy with a record. So maybe they feel I deserve it. Maybe they feel as a black man, like I've told you, I don't deserve any rights as a victim. I unfortunately disagree with these pieces of shit. So people, I decided to sue them in federal court. I decided to attack their funding. I decided to attack their professional reputations. I'm going to attack whatever it takes until these people acknowledge me as the trial ordered victim of this domestic violence dispute between me and this woman, and they grant me my federally mandated rights as the victim of a final restraining order from the state of New Jersey. It does not matter, it's not from New York. New York has to enforce it. New York has to respect the trial process of the order, and New York has to respect the conditions. They cannot frame me for a child and then use that frame complaint that they dismissed to lock me out of resources in New York. And that's what the Richmond County District Attorney's Office does. So yes, people, I call Mike McMahon a piece of shit because he is a racist, lying piece of shit. I call Courtney Chase a unethical piece of shit who should be fired because guess what? She is an unethical liar who should be fired. I say the same about Mackenzie Upshaw, saying she's unethical and she deserves to be fired. And do you know why I say that, audience? Because she destroyed evidence, she hid evidence, excuse me, that would exonerate the victim of a domestic violence dispute that she knew was the victim in order to keep accentuating a false narrative that listed the offender as the victim. These actions by Mackenzie Upshaw, Courtney Chase, Michael McMahon, Darren Albanese, Lisa Thompson, Gabrielle Giovanazzo, Alva Prenga, and the rest of the members of the Richmond County District Attorney's Office violated my rights as the trial ordered final victim of a restraining order protected by the Violence Against Women Act. The fact that the 120 precinct refused to investigate the allegations of my offender who had just been found liable for violating the Violence Against Women Act, and there was an active restraining order, people, that violated my rights because the cop had a mandatory obligation to review this information. Now, people, I have a community that claims to support black men that have turned their back on me because most of the black advocates from this community supported my lying ex. And to protect their professional reputations, people, they don't want to be exposed. So what they decided to do was cut both of us off. Well, they never cut me off because they never cut me on to deal with me. What they did was distance themselves from her so the blowback of her being exposed wouldn't fall on them. The only thing that they didn't anticipate is that I would attack them for what they did to me. So I publicly state, yes, I do attack these people because people, they attacked me first. I was grieving for my mother. The district attorney's office framed me for a charge, and I was grieving for the death of my mother, a woman who this district attorney knew personally. But because he saw that her son was weak, he took that as an opportunity to prosecute an innocent black man. That's why I call him a piece of shit, people. Victor Allen Brown, a man who claims he was my mother's brother. He saw an opportunity of me grieving and he attacked in my emotional state because he knew I was in a weakened state and the possibility of him turning over another nigga to the racist white prosecutor worked for him. So he framed me, people, because they thought I was going to be an easy mark. They thought I was going to be an easy prosecution. They thought I was going to be an easy setup to deny me justice. And people, I'm confident. I smile every day, and I say what I say with great confidence. People, they fucked up playing with Clayton. They messed with me so bad, people. I am determined to expose the corruption in Staten Island and die trying. I'll go broke trying, people. I'm never going to get up until I give up, until I expose Mike McMahon, Victor Brown, and every person who had something to do with framing and defaming me on Staten Island. So if you had something to do with this, you should know that I am your enemy. That's why I speak against you. Ronti Olagunki, I am your enemy. Malcolm Penn in True to Life and Mike Perry, I am your enemy. Dana Walker Boyd, I am your enemy. Camilla Hanks, I am your enemy. Debbie Rose, I am your fucking enemy. Charles Fall, I am your enemy because you're a seller. Let me think of who else. Let me think of who else. Anybody who had something to do with this, I am your enemy. And I didn't choose to be your enemy. You made me your enemy when you attacked me for something I didn't do. Don't claim that you're being harassed because the person you framed is after you to expose you for being what you're not. You're not being harassed because I'm the person that you framed, that you lied on, that you defamed, and I choose to hold you accountable for it. No, you're being held accountable for the fucked up things you did to an innocent man, and you're going to pay for it. So, people, on behalf of Justice and Operation Rock, this is Clayton signing off at 53 minutes and 15 seconds about people for a great live cast that I hope is very informative. Um, I won't be on as much over the next month and a half to 8 weeks because there's something I'm dealing with on the federal level. But hopefully, when it's all over, people, it'll put me in a different position in life, in a stronger position to advocate against the lies and the misconduct of women who lie and file false reports on people. Because this is a very common thing, people. A lot of women out there, and I don't speak against all women, they have learned the power of manipulating law enforcement to become a tool of revenge. And I don't think that was the purpose of granting women the protective rights of restraining orders. No, I don't think it was the purpose of domestic violence and women's suffrage to grant women the power to lie on men because they are physically or socially incapable of getting revenge on them. That's wrong. Women should not be allowed to lie to avoid criminality by accusing men of domestic violence, and just because police might be so racist or so biased towards the man they used a lie they know is a lie to prosecute innocent men. People, that is wrong, and I stand up against it. In every broadcast I make until I get my goal, I am going to stand up against women who lie to law enforcement and file false documents in order to obtain revenge. Vengeance is not granted through manipulating law enforcement. If you really feel a man has hurt you that much that you need revenge, you should have never been with him because clearly something's wrong with you. You can't destroy someone because they don't want to be with you. You can't want someone unhappy simply because they're not happy with you. And that is the true premise behind men and women who do this. I don't choose to let my offender away with that. My defender wants to destroy my life. She wants to make me unhappy. She wants to destroy my reputation. My only true justice to stop this woman is to expose her lies and to expose her within the court system. So the continued vexatious reports, the lies to law enforcement, her attempts to set me up on false charges are definitively squashed, and this woman is dealt with. So I never have to be afraid of going out of my house. So I can get a peaceful night's sleep without having to worry about getting a fucking subpoena in the mail for a woman I haven't seen in over a year just because she's obsessed with me. No, people. The principle of the Domestic Violence Act, the Violence Against Women Act, is to provide victims of domestic violence the one thing we cannot obtain without police intervention or going above and beyond, which is the right to be left alone. As a victim of a domestic violence dispute with a trial order, you have been awarded the right to be left alone. Your offender can't keep refiling charges on you because they're mad they lost in the family court. But this is what happens when you deal with racism that wants to prosecute black men. You're black man, you have no due process rights. You have no double jeopardy protection. No, you can be prosecuted for the same offense anywhere. To this psycho bitch happens to get a conviction off you because she happens to find the right racist judge that completely ignores due process, completely ignores the record of the court, and gives this woman an order because you happen to be a minority or a black man. No, that's wrong. So, people, I fight against that. On behalf of Operation Rocks and Justice, people, at the end of that podcast was a QR code. If you want to donate to the movement, you can. I don't really collect donations. I really fund a lot of the things I do with this charity myself. But I'm going to start, people, because this is something that's severe. Law enforcement needs to arrest women and men who file false reports, and there is valid proof that that has happened. If a woman has filed false reports and there's an order that substantiates that or a transcript that substantiates that, that woman should be arrested. And if a man files a false report, and it can be proven, not the woman's word, not her claiming that he did because that she doesn't want to be with him. If there is actually proof where this man has said, "Listen, I lied on you," then that man should be arrested. But if you have a woman who's doing this, if you have a woman who admits she lies on a guy and admits she falsifies documents, cops have an obligation to arrest them. They don't have an obligation to ignore the report because it exposes them to be biased or racist and unjust. And this is the problem in Staten Island law enforcement. So, people, again, on behalf of justice, on behalf of Operation Rock, I am Clayton, advocating against the racism and oppression within law enforcement that allows women to use criminality. It allows women to use domestic violence to avoid criminality. I'm against law enforcement that allow women to lie to them in order to avoid actual criminal misconduct because they want to prosecute a man more. No, I'm against that, and I'm going to advocate for it every day until I run out of breath. So, people, stand with me, stand against racist institutions like Staten Island, stand against oppressive, lying women who file vexatious litigation like Francina Evans, and people stand against injustice and false advocates like those within your local community that pretend to be part of the solution, but they're actually part of the problem. On behalf of Justice and Operation Rock, we'll be back in a couple of days, not tomorrow, probably Thursday or Friday. Thank you for watching.